following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, Ralph Tyko, in Alameda, California. And I have a terrific guest. I can't believe how my heart is beating. I go back 40 years with this guy on one level or another. He is an iconic junior college coach and sent a bunch of folks to the big leagues. And he's Jerry Weinstein. Jerry, welcome to the Zone.
Nice to be there, Ralph. Good to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. I don't know where to start, so I'll start with Sacramento, California, where I spent my early adulthood in the late 60s, early 70s at Renfrey Field a lot of times. Tell us about what a hotbed of baseball Sacramento is, Jerry.
Well, and not only is, but was, especially at that time, is kind of like a perfect storm. Sacramento City College, we had tremendous pool of athletes to draw from. I think for all intents and purposes, it was a baseball town. I would say that baseball was number one in certainly in the community and in the high schools. There were lots of players, really good coaching, and a great level of interest at the time.
And leave us not forget the American Legion program, where we crossed paths through Manuel Perry Jr. Post 51.
I think it was post 61. Ralphie,
61. Okay.
Onto that.
You get older, numbers fade.
Another thing about during that time, I was at Sac City from 74 through 99, and obviously doing other things, coaching USA teams and pro ball during the summer. But it was not a heavily recruited area. There was not the travel ball network. Players played at Land Park or at Renfrey Field. They played with their friends. They played in their neighborhood. And so all the better players would come to the community colleges, and we got more than our share at Sacramento City College during that time.
Do you remember, what was his name? Bishop, drafted by the Red Sox. Joel Bishop.
That's Joel Bishop from McClatchy High School, shortstop.
Yes.
That was before I got to Sac City.
Okay. Well, Joel, I sponsored his uniform in American Legion with Post 61 on Manuel's team, and again, he was drafted number one by the Red Sox. Faded for one reason or another, but what a talent, and just indicative of what the city produced in those days. And a great history: Larry Boa, Dusty Baker, the names that came from Sacramento before your time. You had a lot to draw from.
Well, we had a very favorable environment. We had, in the 25 years I was there, we had over 30 big league players and upwards of 200 players who signed.
Whoa. When I said that in the introduction, that you sent people to the bigs, I knew you sent them to the minors. Memory faded that it was that many people that made the bigs. Holy Toledo. Bring us up to date in your pro coaching career. You're about to leave for instructional league. I know you're with the Colorado Rockies, and I'm just wondering, are you still at Stockton?
Well, no, I managed Modesto for 5 years.
Oh, Modesto. That's why I saw you at Stockton. But yes.
Right. Right now, I split my time between scouting and player development. I go to spring training and instruction league and work with players, whatever our farm director wants me to do. I work in all different areas. I spend a lot of time with the catchers, but I do a lot of other things as well. And then when I'm not in instruction league or spring training, then I work in scouting for Bill Schmidt, and I go out and I see all the top catchers in the country. And then during the summer, I spent the summer for the last 2 years in the Cape Cod League, managing in Wareham and covering that, helping our scouts cover that league as well. So, and then in between times I'm not scouting or working player development, I do a lot of speaking right after this instructional league, and we call it fall development program. It goes from November 11th through the 10th through the 24th, and then I'll go to Australia for 10 days to do some clinics and come back and do 5 or 10 days of clinics here in the United States during the fall before spring training starts.
Well, you touched on the Cape Cod League. That's a very special league because they use bats, and it's an amateur league. So scouts get to look at real baseball. Tell us about that.
Well, I think upwards of 30% of the players who play in the Cape Cod League play in the big league. So it's a fertile ground for players, and all the better players are playing against one another. And we are using wooden bats, and it's geographically the teams are close, and so scouts can see a lot of players in a short period of time. And they see all the better players playing against one another, with the exception of a small number of players who are playing for Team USA.
Okay. I'm just thinking of questions, going back to our conversation. Do you attribute a big part of the reason that baseball was and is so big in Sacramento to the weather, purely the weather? Does that have a lot to do with it?
No, I don't think purely the weather. The weather is challenging in the fall. We played in the fall from September 1st till a week before Christmas, and I can tell you for a fact that we've had some cold, chilly days from November till especially November through even as early as March, and so I don't think it's all the weather. I think it's just it's a lot of elements that come into play. Weather certainly is a factor, but facilities are a factor. I know that having Land Park in the fall to utilize, and we had as many as 80 players in our program in the fall, and we had 3 fields that we could utilize, and during that time we played upwards of 200 games in the fall, because we would have 2 teams that would play double headers every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then we'd work out Monday through Thursday. So we were able to get a lot of reps. I think that a lot of professional players reside in Sacramento and provide good leadership and good modeling for the players. And I just think there's a lot of elements. Now, weather is a factor in that we don't have to deal with a lot of rain and a lot of snow, but it can be cold and damp, and which is not all bad. A little adversity is good.
Okay, speaking of the weather, there's a new theory in baseball, that signing a pitcher who pitched in maybe Minnesota, say, or cold weather environment where they didn't pitch much early on, can help prolong their career because they don't have that many innings and stuff. So conversely, a bad weather place to grow up could end up helping a pitcher. Is that's something that is bandied around in player development?
Well, it's probably bandied around. For me, I'm not sure how valid that is, because when a guy pitches more, then you have a better stat line on how durable the guy's going to be. I think from a skill level standpoint that those guys that have not pitched as much probably have more room for development, and you can maybe project them a little bit better. But having that track record of performance, that's why college pitchers predict better as future professionals than high school pitchers, because of they're competing on a more level playing field, and you have more track record in terms of how they develop as how their skills develop, plus also their injury history. But the fact still remains that the Sunshine States, the Floridas, Arizonas, the Texas, the Californias, produce the most players. Obviously, there's more people playing in those areas, so that's a factor. I'm not sure how valid, that, doesn't have as much mileage on his arm is. I think for certain, I think there's maybe some truth to it, but I don't think that's an overriding factor.
Okay. Jerry, I want to ask you one question, and then we'll talk about whatever you'd like to get over. You can plug anything you want. Podcast is selfless self-promotion. So I'm going to ask you about the proposed changes that Major League Baseball is talking about with the minor leagues, eliminating A teams, entry-level teams, high A teams. What's that about? How serious is it? And what's going on?
Well, let's talk specifically about eliminating teams. I think that they're trying to have fewer levels so that they can move players faster. And I have mixed emotions about that. I'm a big Branch Rickey fan, and one of his overriding guiding principles is out of quantity comes quality. And I think the more players you have, the more chances you have to develop players. But also there's a cost factor because a very high percentage of players never play in the big leagues, probably as many as 90%. I think that also having more teams slows the development of players going through, having barriers in terms of players in front of them and so on. Maybe you can move players faster with fewer teams. I kind of have mixed emotions about that. I like the availability of a lot of players, and then you move the players accordingly. I don't think you necessarily it's not social or age related. I think it's based on performance. And if you got a 19-year-old that's better than your 23-year-old at Double-A, you move that 19-year-old when he's ready, and he doesn't have to wait for the other guy, which I think most people do anyway. So I guess the more I think about it, the less I like eliminating teams.
Okay. Would they have if they eliminated teams, would they have some sort of Ewing type, Sid Thrift type academy that they would go to for players, or would they just be signing fewer players?
I can't answer that question. I don't think that that professional baseball will sanction eliminating players, but having these academies, which for all intents and purposes are other teams. But I'm really, that's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. When they send me a player, then I work with that player. Or if I'm going to see a team and evaluating that team and the personnel, I do that. But I don't know what the fallback position is, whether that'll lead to more academies. I think it'll lead to more players playing in independent leagues. I think that will really help the independent leagues, so that outside of MILB sanctioned leagues, you'll have a boon in independent leagues because there'll be more players looking for jobs.
Okay. You mentioned independent leagues, and major leagues are trying out these bunch of new rules, and they're doing it through the Atlantic League, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
I'm just wondering if there are any rule change proposals that either appeal to you or not appeal to you off the top of your head.
Well, I'm the only ones that I'm aware of is the automated strike zone, which I'm not a fan of. My thought is, hey, you get the best umpires and the best umpires that have the best judgment and the best metrics behind the plate, and those guys umpire behind the plate. The guys that are not good behind the plate, they don't umpire behind the plate. I don't like to take the human element out of the game more than we have to, and certainly we're taking a level of skill, and we're saying, well, it's not important anymore. And we've done that a lot with the game as it is today, which has become a huge power game, and execution is suffering. And to me, that's the subtle beauty of the game, that it's more than just swinging from your rear end and mashing and swinging and missing. I like to see guys that are more diversified in their tool set.
Hey, you'd like to see a guy get a runner over into scoring position by taking two and hitting to right. Am I correct?
Well, whatever it happens to be, the short game, just the execution game, knowing how to make outs, knowing how to move the ball, knowing how to adjust with two strikes, those types of things. And now it's somewhat of an all-or-nothing game, even though our hitters are more skilled than they've ever been. They're capable of doing anything if we make it important enough. Other things that they've done in those leagues, I think they've changed the size of the bases. I'm not sure how that's affecting the game. I would like to see an adjustment with the running lane, and we saw it in the World Series, and the call, which was a correct call, because the guy did interfere, and Trey Turner was running inside all the way, that we either move the running lane inside so that you run straight to the base, or we put a secondary base in foul territory like they've done in, I think maybe softball has done it, where a guy runs in the running box and runs straight to the base. I'd like to see something like that happen. I like the clock and the time in between pitches. To me, the game's too slow. A 9-inning game for me should never go over 3 hours. Too much time in between pitches. Those are the types of things that I would like to see change. Moving the mound back, I don't like that, and I think they eventually did not do that in the Atlantic League. And there are some other things that were interesting as well, but the big ones for me is the pace of play, and not a fan of the mechanized robotic umpire.
Okay. Jerry, who was your mentor? You've mentored so many folks in baseball. When you were coming up at any level, who influenced you to get to the place you're at?
Well, this is going to sound very strange, but to this day, the coach that had the most influence on me was my Little League coach at age of 8. I had a guy named Murray Burke who had just come back from Korea, and he had a son, Pete, and we were on the same Little League team, and he was an ex-professional player, and he had another guy, Jerry Weinstein, who was a really good coach. And to this day, that's the guy that influenced me more than anything else in terms of preparation and playing the game hard and playing the game right. And I was very fortunate to be in that situation. Then from there on, I was kind of a cerebral type kid, and I not very skilled, and I always felt like I never felt like I'm going to play in the big leagues, and I was always, when I played, I was viewing the game from the standpoint of player development and managing and coaching and teaching, and so obviously a lot of people had impact on me, but the one that impacted me the most from a standpoint of developing a passion for the game was Murray Burke.
Wow. You can't ever be too young for the game. Who did you grow up rooting for as a kid?
I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. Campy was the guy I liked the most.
Is that who put the catching bug into you? Because
yes, no doubt. And from day one, I guess I was a little chubby kid, and I guess they gave the chubby kids the gear, and he says, "Hey, you throw like a catcher, and you're going to catch. We're going to teach you how to catch." And then I kind of gravitated. We always liked the Dodgers, and especially they were playing in the World Series all the time against the Yankees. This is before there was professional Major League Baseball on the West Coast, but we always went to the Coast League games, and I was a big fan of El Tappy and Bobby Bragan, and always gravitated toward the catchers, but Campy was my guy.
Well, Elvin Tappy was one of the coaches that was on that, I think it was 1960 or whatever. They had a revolving coaching thing.
Right, the College of Coaches with the Cubs. That's what they called it.
With the Cubs, right. And so his name sticks out in my mind. And he had a brother that played, too. There was another Tappy somewhere along the line. Briefly, I've kept you all this time. You mentioned the Coast League, and tell us about the greatness of the Coast League and how close it was to being Major League Baseball back in those days.
Well, at that time, there were players in the Coast League that were making more money than players in the big leagues, and the salaries were very low in the big leagues. And there were individual owners. Like we lived in L.A. and we went to Gilmore Field and saw the Hollywood Stars all the time. And the big rivalry was Hollywood Stars and the L.A. Angels. El Tappy played for the Angels, and Bobby Bragan was a player manager with the Hollywood Stars. But we would go to Gilmore Field all the time and either take a bus or hitchhike down there, and tremendous caliber play. And my point in mentioning that the salaries were low in the big leagues, there were guys that were making more money in the Coast League and refused promotion to the big leagues at times, especially later in their career when money was important, because there was a guy that owned the Hollywood Stars, a guy named Bob Cobb, who used to own the Brown Derby, and the Cobb salad was named after Bob Cobb, by the way. And they owned a percentage of their own players. Now, the Pirates, that was the Pirates minor league team, but the owners were allowed to own a certain number of players, and they would usually be ex-big league players who were, kind of 4A players at the time and up and down big league players, and they would pay their salaries or supplement their salaries, and a lot of them chose to stay in the Coast League and make more money.
And they would be in, not only would they make more money, but their playing conditions were much superior because they'd go into a town and stay for a week. And
they would play. The Coast League would play. They'd play single games Monday through Saturday, or Tuesday through Saturday, doubleheader on Sunday, and then Monday was dark. And usually, and I know with the Hollywood Stars and the LA Angels, by the time they got to that Sunday, and they had been playing one another for 5 or 6 straight days, there was bound to be a brawl on either Friday, Saturday, or Sunday because of what happened in the previous games.
Right, brushback pitches, this, that, or the other thing. So, good place to watch baseball as a kid. Am I correct? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, if you got close to the on-deck circle, you could have a running conversation with the on-deck hitter, and it was a wooden facility, and everything was close, and the players were very accessible. And I remember I was at UCLA. I was playing, and we had an exhibition game with the Hollywood Stars, and they were no longer in Hollywood. They were playing in Hawaii, and we played them. And then after the game, they showered in our locker room. And I remember Carlos Bernier was on that team, and he was a big fan favorite, and I got a big kick out of telling him how I used to watch him as a little kid, and I was in college at the time. But that was a connection with the Coast League at the time.
Baseball keeps us all being little kids, and Campy said it best, if I remember. You get to play in the dirt and the grass. So what a wonderful game. Jerry, I'll ask you my closing question. If baseball weren't an issue in your life, if you never came across a baseball game, what do you think you would have done with yourself? You mentioned that you were a kind of a introverted intellectual kid. What were some of your other interests that might have turned into a passion?
Well, I would have been a football coach, no doubt. I played football in high school and really liked to play football. Matter of fact, early on when I first started coaching, especially in high schools where you pretty much had to coach 2 sports or more, I always coached football and thoroughly enjoyed coaching football. And I would have done that. I might have gone to law school, I think, or I would have been more of an exercise scientist, something analytical for sure.
But you wouldn't have sent all those players to the big leagues. So whatever it was, this was better.
Well, I'm not unhappy with the path that I was able to take, and as far as sending the players to the big leagues, we just provided a platform for them to develop their skills, and they sent themselves. You know, they would have done it without me, I'm sure, but we were lucky enough to be in a position to help them.
I'm sure you're being unnecessarily modest. Jerry, tell us about anything you got going, anything you want to plug. As I say, it's selfless self-promotion.
I'm not a plugger. I don't have. I've written a book, and as a matter of fact, I've just edited it, 2nd edition, after 5 years, and it's on catching. And if you're interested, it's WeinsteinBaseball.com.
That's the plug I was looking for. Thank you for a terrific interview, Jerry.
You bet, Ralph. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Enjoy Instructional League. They don't call it that anymore. What is it called now?
We call it Fall Development Program.
Beautiful. I like these new age names. Keeps me young.
You bet.
All right.
Okay, Ralph. Good talking to you.
Sei gesund.
Same to you. See ya.
All right. Adios. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.